right, real quickly, we're going to talk a little bit about some insect pests and beneficials, just briefly, and a little bit about IPM, which is Integrated Pest Management. So pests versus beneficials. Beneficial insects, like the monarch butterfly, they do good things for us, right? They're pollinators. They provide us with products such as honey and wax. They're a food supply for animals and other humans. Here in the United States, we don't eat a lot of insects on purpose, but in other countries they do, so they're a good source of protein. If you've been to the Insectarium in New Orleans, they have a whole, like an insect cafe, I think is what they call it, and you can try all different kinds. I have had chocolate-covered crickets, hush puppies with mealworms, and Rice Krispies with mealworms. And while I didn't really care for the mealworm things, the chocolate-covered crickets, they taste like a Crunch Bar. So if you've ever had a Crunch Bar, it's pretty much the same thing. So that would be a great presentation for someone to give, maybe make chocolate-covered crickets. And then other things that beneficial insects do for us is they consume weeds and prey, and they also parasitize our pest insects. So we use insects as biological controls a lot of times to help us control some insect problems. Okay? So our pest insects, what makes it a pest? A pest insect is causing harm to something, so either that be humans, livestock, or crops. And when we do have a pest insect, if we need to control it, we want to try to use integrated pest management, or IPM, techniques. When you see, you'll probably see the term IPM a lot if you are doing reading or in your book or something like that. That just means integrated pest management. So what are some IPM techniques? These are a lot of different things we can do to control an insect, and you might use a combination of these things. You might use one of them and see the results that you need. You can use resistant plant varieties. This is a really easy one. You can use cultural controls, mechanical controls, biological controls, and then again you can use pesticides. So using kind of a mixed approach when it comes to controlling insects. So resistant plant varieties, I'm sure y'all all know what resistant plant varieties are. You probably look for them, if you're doing research on what to add to your garden, you might look for something that shows resistance to an issue that we have here in Louisiana. Y'all have had Dr. Singh, the plant doctor, yet? So a lot of those diseases and issues that we see, you can select for resistant varieties. The same thing goes for insects. Some plants resist pests better than others. Some varieties of plants are resistant to certain pests. So the plant may naturally contain a chemical that's unappealing to insects, that repels the insect. Some plants are more vigorous or tolerant to those pests. We talked about the squash vine borer. If you've ever had squash vine borer, it's kind of like the end of the road for your squash plant. I've read, you can cover the plant, the damaged vine with soil and the plant may reroot, or wrap the plant in tin foil and things like that. It just never seems to work when I tried. It might work for some other people, but they just aren't really tolerant to that squash vine borer. So maybe if we could find a variety that is, we could probably make a lot of money, and we'd have a solution to that problem. Also, some physical characteristics make the plant unappealing. Plants that are covered with a lot of fine hairs or prickly, thick hairs. A lot of times that's unappealing to the insect. It's not easy for them to walk on. Maybe it kind of punctures them when they walk on it. So they're going to go somewhere else that doesn't have those physical characteristics. Okay? Cultural controls. Cultural controls are an easy thing that we can do as gardeners to manage our pest problems. So cultural practices alter the environment, condition of the host plant, or behavior of the pest. A really easy thing we can do is sanitation. And again, this kind of goes hand in hand with the disease issues that we see. Cleaning up maybe infected leaves that have fallen off a tree, or removing our old tomato plants and composting them away from where our garden is, or destroying them, however that may be. Removal of alternative hosts. The less plants that you have that are appealing to that insect, maybe they'll go somewhere else. You know, now if you have the other host there and you remove them all and then you have another host, they're probably going to move from one host to the other. So you got to be careful with that. Moving our planting or harvest date. If you grow sweet corn, one of the easiest things you can do to avoid corn earworm is to plant early. Those corn plants get established, they form that ear, and the corn earworm can't get down in there. Now if you plant late, you might get some more corn earworms. So an easy thing you can do is plant early. You always risk a little bit of cold weather, you know, when you plant early, but you have to weigh those options and decide what will work for you. Also, crop rotation. Crop rotation is great for a lot of things. It's good for the soil, it's good for insect control, disease control. So crop rotation, again, something you should look into when controlling your insect pests. Mechanical controls, this is another easy one. If you're an organic gardener, this is probably going to be one of your main types of insect pest removal. So physical removal of the pest. Simply taking the pest off the plant and disposing of it however you may choose. That may mean smashing it between two bricks. It may mean throwing it in your neighbor's yard or feeding it to your chickens, whatever. Remove that pest and get it out of your garden. Tilling or destroying overwintering pests. So when you till your garden, if there's insect pests that are maybe overwintering in the soil, if they're in an immature stage in the soil, that tillage is a lot of times actually going to destroy that insect pest. Also, physical barriers. You know, if you have a very exotic crop that you might want to grow and you really want to protect it, you could put it in a greenhouse. And you could keep all the insect pests out. You could net the plant and cover it with some type of netting that would keep the insects out. Now there are always ways for the insect to get in, but of course this would really help either keep them in or keep them out. Biological controls are the use of natural enemies to control an insect pest. Y'all are probably familiar with this technique. So this could be something as simple as beneficial insects, encouraging beneficial insects in your garden. You could use parasites or parasitoids to control an insect pest. The difference between these two, a parasite is going to complete its entire life cycle within the host. So you're never really going to see that parasite, while a parasitoid is going to complete part of its life cycle in a host. So, and we're going to talk about an example of this a little bit later, but tomato hornworm has a great parasitoid that will actually, it's a wasp insect. It's going to lay the egg on the hornworm. The larvae is going to actually develop within the hornworm and basically just eats it alive. It's kind of gruesome. And then it's going to make a little cocoon on the back of the hornworm. It looks like a little white cocoon. Y'all maybe have seen them. And then it's going to emerge as a wasp and it's going to fly off and find more tomato hornworms. So she's looking at me like, oh my gosh, why would they do that? So those are good natural controls. If you've ever had a hornworm problem, I promise you won't feel sorry for these hornworms. And then finally we have predators, which are things like birds and lizards and maybe your cat or your dog or whatever that's going to go out and eat these insects. And then last but not least, we have pesticides. You can use a conventional pesticide or you can use an organic pesticide. You know, there are a lot of options out there for either one. No matter what you use, you always want to read and follow the label. I don't think y'all have had your pesticide class yet, but this is very, very important. The label is the law. So read the label and follow the label. We can't tell people just to read the label. You have to say read and follow because sometimes they read it and ignore it. So as master gardeners, read and follow the label. Always wear your proper personal protective equipment or PPE. So, you know, sometimes this can be a little difficult. I can say I'm guilty of it, I guess. When you're throwing out the fire ant poison in the lawn, you know, yes, you should put on gloves. Yes, you should put on your closed-toed shoes. You know, you don't want to be barefoot out there scattering your ant poison. And you also, of course, want to avoid spraying when plants are in bloom to avoid contact with our pollinators. Of course, there's a big movement right now. We want to protect our pollinators always. So that's just an easy way that you can help them out, is avoiding spraying while they're in bloom. So I think with that, that wraps up this first presentation. Does anyone have any questions so far just on what's in the book, what we covered in basic entomology? That was kind of a crash course in it. No questions? Clear as mud? Oh, okay.
You know, okay, in reference to bugs with fruit trees.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when would you try to kill the bugs?
In a fruit tree?
Yeah, in a fruit tree.
Okay, so his question is, if you're trying to control an insect in a fruit tree, how would you do that? So just citrus, for example, when you read up on citrus, you know, pest management things, it's always going to tell you to spray after bloom. So, you know, our trees bloom in the spring, you know, maybe March or something like that. You want to wait till most of those blooms have fallen off the tree, and then if you need to spray something, you could do that then. You know, and if you know, okay, I remember this year in March I had a big problem with, you know, whatever. Or during the summer I had a problem with stink bugs or leaf-footed bugs maybe in my citrus tree. Just keep that in mind, and then next year about that same time you can remember, okay, I might need to put something out there. So, and so, you know, sometimes it might not always be convenient for us to avoid spraying when plants are in bloom, but if you can just wait a couple days or a week or so, yeah. I had a call in Assumption. We have a community center that's right down the road from our office. And they called me this spring because, well, when they called, they were like, oh, there's bees all in these bushes. And I'm thinking, oh, they got a swarm of bees that, you know, you get these big swarms that land. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to come look. I'm going to, you know, bring you some people you can call to remove it. So I get over there. There's like 4 bees. And they're just on the flowers in the bush. I'm like, are you serious? This is the problem? So anyway, if you can wait, or, you know, they wanted to trim those hedges, you know, just wait. They're not going to bother you, you know. It wasn't an emergency like they kind of made it out to be. So, anything else?
Have they had any other studies or things done on, because, like, if you get...
When we think about beneficial insects, you know, ladybugs are like ladybugs and honeybees are the first thing we think of. But ladybugs can be a huge pest, too. If they get in your house, you know, if you have cracks and crevices, if you live in an old house, you know, they really get in there. So it's, you know, you kind of have to weigh your options. But if you're trying to bring them in as a beneficial, what I always kind of recommend is look at where you're getting them from. You know, if you're ordering them online to release here in Louisiana, you know, and you've got a couple options, let's order them from Texas or Louisiana, not, you know, Montana or Minnesota. You know, those ladybugs might not be as adapted to our climate. And then also, I've read releasing them like at dusk, you know, kind of helps them to stay in your area. You know, you have to have food for them. So if you don't have an aphid problem or, you know, insect problem, yeah. Yes, exactly. So you want to make sure they're going to stay. And then also I've read that if you have a water source for them, that helps. But insects can fly, so other than like netting your whole yard, those are just... So there are 2 types of insects that will visit your garden plants. The good, which are our beneficial insects, and then of course the bad, which are our pest insects. So today we're going to talk about some different pest insects, and obviously this is not all of them. And if y'all do have a specific insect pest that you're dealing with, just ask at the end of this and we'll try to cover those. But just a few of the ones we'll talk about today: aphids, scales, whiteflies, squash bugs, leaf-footed bugs, stink bugs, potato beetles, Japanese beetles, leaf miners, spotted cucumber beetle, striped cucumber beetle, bean leaf beetle, cutworms, cabbage looper, tomato hornworm, corn earworm, fire ants, spiders, mites, snails, and slugs, which the last few aren't insects actually, but we'll talk about them anyway because people have issues with them. So, all right, okay, I'm going to move, move over here. Okay, so the first one that we're going to talk about is aphids. So, y'all are probably all familiar with aphids. Aphids are a very small insect pest. As you can see here, this is the backside of, I think, a soybean leaf. And you can see all the little aphids on here. If you get a little closer up to them, that's what they look like. A lot of them don't have wings. Some of them are winged. We call those our alates. They're a soft-bodied insect. You can smush them with your finger, which is the easy way to control them. But if you just happen to miss one, the population can build back up. They can be green, they can be yellow, they can be orange, they can be dark purple, they can be brown, they can be all different colors, but they're all going to pretty much look the same shape. And you can see in this picture, there's these little white kind of flecks around the aphids. That's actually the shed exoskeleton. So remember how we talked about the cicada, and it was the exact same shape as the cicada? This one's not quite so structured, but that is the exoskeleton. So a lot of times people will call and say, I have aphids, and then I have these little white things all over too. I don't know what it is, and it's just the exoskeleton. When you get aphids on your plants, they have that piercing, sucking mouth part that we talked about. And that's what all of our, what we call true bugs, or the bugs that belong to the order Hemiptera, have. They're going to pierce the plant, so either the leaf tissue or the fruit of the plant, and they're going to suck out the good sap and the juices of the plant. And then you're going to see yellowing. You might see the leaf start to curl up. The leaf might eventually fall off the plant. But that's the type of damage that is going to occur. There are a lot of different chemical controls you can use on these. There's organic controls, there's conventional controls. But if you have aphids, you can easily control them. And like I said earlier, you can also just smush them. We'll talk about a couple of these, and then we'll talk about some beneficial insects that feed on these. So our next insect is scales. Scales can be a problem on a lot of different things, but it typically seems like we see them on a lot of ornamentals. So here we have our sago palm, and I always see them on sago palms. And my friend, I have a friend in New Orleans, and at her apartment complex, they have these big sago palms, and they got scales all over them. And I'm always like, you need to write the apartment owner and tell them about these scales. And she never does. But anyway, what they'll do is they'll get on this mid-vein, and then you'll start to see this discolorization on the leaves here. When you get up close to the scale, it's kind of a small, flat-like, scale-like structure. They can be hard-bodied, they can be soft-bodied. It just depends. Sometimes you can kind of just hit them with your finger and they'll kind of pop right off, but if you have a lot of them, you might need to apply some type of chemical control to them. Okay?
Do you know what do you put on?
For scales, a lot of times you can use a neem oil, or there's like a sun spray oil. So oils work good on them because it'll actually penetrate that scale kind of waxy coating. I don't know, I think malathion might work pretty good on scales. But again, it just, you need, make sure you check if it's labeled for ornamentals, or if it's on something else, it's labeled for that. But it seems like a lot of times those scales are on ornamental plants. So, but those oils work good on them. Here we have a mealybug. Looks a lot like the scale, but a lot of times these are soft bodies, and then they kind of have these little rigid edges on the side of them. Again, like our aphids, both the scales and our mealybugs have that piercing, sucking mouth part, and they're going to cause the same type of damage. That piercing, sucking mouth part is going to pierce the plant, remove the good juices, and we're going to start to see the discolorization of the leaf and things like that. This is a whitefly. This is the backside of a citrus leaf, and here are all our little whiteflies. This is what they look like up close, kind of moth-like in appearance, but it's actually related to those true bugs, more closely related to a stink bug than a moth. Soft-bodied again, piercing, sucking mouth part, so same type of damage. It's like, you'll kind of start to see a theme in all of these. And they'll cause this discolorization on the leaf. But with all these insects that we just talked about, the aphids, the scales, the mealybugs, and the whiteflies, another issue that occurs is after they've removed so much of that sap from the plant, they start producing or excreting what's called honeydew. So you'll get honeydew on your plant, and then once you get that honeydew, you get this sooty mold. So it seems like you can get sooty mold on just about anything. And a lot of times people think, oh, I got a mold problem, I need a fungicide, I'm going to take care of this. Really, you have to control your insect problem, and then eventually that sooty mold will go away. So as long as you still have insects that are excreting that honeydew, you'll keep getting sooty mold. So control your insects, eventually your sooty mold will go away. Sometimes people will ask, okay, I controlled my aphids or whatever it is, Now what do I do to get that sooty mold to go away faster? There's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, rain will eventually rinse it off. You can get out there with a cloth and you can wipe it off. I mean, you're not going to do that on a big citrus tree, but maybe if you have a, you know, a potted plant or something on your patio that has large leaves, you could do that. And you can see right here where we just scratched the surface of that leaf, and the leaf is just as green as it can be underneath that sooty mold. So it just kind of depends how patient you are with letting that sooty mold wash itself away. This was a lady, I remember going to this house, she had had, I think, knee replacement surgery or something, so she'd been laid up for a few weeks on the couch, and when she finally got where she could walk around again, she went outside and her citrus tree was just covered, and she was like, oh my gosh, and her sons were supposed to be taking care of it, and they had slacked off. So, yeah.
They also like hibiscus.
Yes.
And what else?
Oh, a lot of different things. These, like aphids and whiteflies, you'll see on a lot of different stuff. Vegetables, ornamentals, trees like this. A lot of these, you know, can feed on several different things. So, yeah, you'll see them. A lot of times they are on the underside of leaves, and a lot of times we don't notice them until we start to see that discolorization, and then we're like, oh, let me check on that. And we flip the leaf over and covered in aphids or whatever. So important to get out there, scout your garden. You know, don't scout it from a distance. You know, get in there and turn those leaves over and really look at it. I know as master gardeners, y'all are going to do that. Y'all probably already do those things. But, you know, when you're talking to homeowners, you know, kind of stress that importance of getting out there. And I know in the summer it's hot, and it seems like when these problems really take off, because we kind of, you know, oh, it's too hot, I'm not going to get out there. But very important to stay on top of what's going on in your garden or lawn. So, but the good thing about these four that we just talked about, they can easily be controlled, and there's a lot of different methods. So learning how to identify it is important, so then you really know what you're controlling. And I had a conversation with one of the master gardeners that was back here, and we were just talking about when you go to the garden center or wherever and you're asking for a certain insecticide, knowing the active ingredient. And y'all will talk about that more in your pesticide class, but it's just like when we talk about this binomial nomenclature and we say, yeah, tomato fruit worm. Well, here it might be one thing and there it might be another. The same thing goes with insecticides. You know, oh, it was an ortho and it's in a blue bottle and someone told me to use it. You know, take a picture of it or take the sheet of paper that has the recommendation with you to the nursery, because when you think you're going to remember metsulfuron when you get there, it slips your mind. So important to get the right thing. So, okay. All right, this is a leaf-footed bug, and we're actually going to pin some of these this afternoon. But leaf-footed bug, it's a large bug. It's very easy to identify. It has this nice white stripe across its back, or its abdomen right there. And then it has these expanded segments on its hind legs that kind of give it its name, so leaf-footed bug. These can be a pest in citrus. They're a pest in your vegetable garden on tomatoes. There they are on some zinnias. A pest on a lot of different things, but big and easy to identify. The bigger these insects get, a lot of times the more difficult they get to control. You know, just like, what's the story with Goliath? Who is it? Solomon and Goliath? Who is it? David. I ought to know that, huh? David and Goliath, okay? This is the Goliath of the insect world, right? And the hornworm. So they can be a little bit harder to control when they get that big. The good thing about these, if you're an organic gardener, they're very easy just to pick off the plant and remove them. Sometimes that's easier than thinking about what you can spray. You know, if you have kids around, it's a fun game. Encourage them to collect the bugs off your plants, right? Again, these have a piercing, sucking mouth part. They're a true bug related to Hemiptera, and they're going to cause discolorization on your oranges. You know, sometimes if you have citrus trees, you'll cut open an orange. It'll have that dry spot in it. It's yellow. A lot of times that's from either a leaf-footed bug or a stink bug that causes that. On the zinnias, what it would do is it would pierce the bud, and then when that bud would open up, it would kind of be deformed. On your tomatoes, you get that yellow spot when they start to get red, and you think, oh, it's such a pretty tomato, and now I have this yellow spot on it. So that's the type of damage that you're going to see with leaf-footed bugs. Okay. Here's our stink bug, another true bug, right? Piercing, sucking mouth part. Stink bugs are really easy to identify. They're a pretty good sized bug, maybe the size of a dime to a nickel. They're going to have kind of this triangle structure on the back right here. They're going to be green, they're going to be brown, they might have a couple stripes on them, they might be kind of mottled in appearance, but easy to identify. And this is the type of damage that you're going to see, what we just talked about. They're going to pierce the fruit. You might not see it when the tomato is green, but as that tomato begins to ripen, if you've ever grown tomatoes, you've probably seen this type of damage and you think, well, there's nothing wrong with it, but that's your stink bug damage. So again, easy to control. Organically, you can just pick them off if they're not too many of them, and there's a lot of options out there if you wanted to use an insecticide, a conventional insecticide as well. And we're also going to pin stink bugs this afternoon, so get excited. Okay. All right, this is a squash. Kind of looks similar to that leaf-footed bug that we saw a minute ago. There are a lot of these true bugs that kind of have this same shape and size, and we'll talk about a beneficial that kind of looks like this as well that someone was asking about earlier, assassin bugs. They kind of have this same look to them. Our squash bug, primarily a pest on squash and other cucurbits. Again, piercing, sucking mouth part. On squash, what you're going to see is the fruit's going to kind of get a little dip in it. It might have like a brown sunken spot on it. Same thing with your cucumbers and things like that. Again, piercing, sucking mouth part. On a lot of these true bugs, and you could kind of see it on the stink bug, they'll have this triangular shape right here, or kind of an X shape if you look all the way across. And that just forms, we talked about the hemelytra, that first pair of wings, you can kind of see this is more leathery, whereas that's more typical of your wing structure. So that's your potato beetle, and I like this insect because it's very easy to identify and it's kind of pretty. It has this nice kind of orangish red head and thorax, and then you can see its wings right here on the abdomen are kind of like a black and white stripe. Very easy to identify. I don't see them that often, but if you grow potatoes, anybody grow potatoes? You see them sometimes? Yes? Yeah. I was giving this talk in Washington Parish, and they were all like, we see them all the time, but they all grow potatoes.
And when you say potatoes, that includes sweet potatoes, or?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, yeah. And I guess, I mean, I have some sweet potato vine at my house, but I don't see them on there, so maybe, do what? Yeah, maybe they don't like that variety or something. But potato beetles, it's a large beetle, very round in shape. If you kind of think of what a ladybug looks like, but bigger, it's going to have that same kind of round shape to it. Again, easy to identify. Our beetles as adults have chewing mouth parts, so the type of damage you're going to see is going to be different. So we just talked about all those true bugs that have a piercing, sucking mouth part that are going to cause discolorization, spots, sunken areas. Whereas these insects, our beetles, are actually going to remove leaf material or plant material, you know, a hole in the fruit. You know, the leaf is gone. That's going to be an insect with chewing mouth parts, like your potato beetle. Okay? This is a Japanese beetle. We actually don't have these here yet in Louisiana, luckily, and hopefully we won't get them. But I just wanted to show it to y'all so y'all be aware of it. Someone was telling me the other day, I think it was Craig, was saying that, oh, we'll never get them here in Louisiana, but you never know, right? So this is a Japanese beetle. It kind of has the same shape as a June bug. Y'all, everybody knows what a June bug looks like. Same kind of shape and size, except these are going to be like iridescent in color. So you can see in the picture, kind of has a greenish brown tint to it. And then the insect has these white tufts of hair along the abdomen right here. So it's very easy to identify. Japanese beetles are a huge pest in grapes, also roses and some other ornamentals. This is the type of damage that they cause. They feed in one spot and they move over and they start feeding in another spot, and they move over and they start feeding in another spot. So they really can be a really bad pest. When we first really started having issues with them, they came out with this pheromone trap. It was like a yellow bag, and you put a pheromone inside it, and it would attract the Japanese beetles, and they would fall in the bag, and they wouldn't get out. They would die. But the problem that they soon found is that they were attracting Japanese beetles. So, you know, if the bag filled up, then they would go on the grapes or on the roses or on whatever else was there. So if you're using a pheromone trap, you got to make sure you put that away from whatever it is you're trying to protect.